Fasting is not so much about going without food or without something. It's much more about having more time with God. So it's about trading something good for something better. We're saying no to something good so we can say yes to what's best. It's almost as if we're just not even thinking about the spiritual discipline of fasting. And I kind of wonder if maybe we approach it like we tend to approach the Old Testament sacrifices. Like fasting's just like a thing that they did back in the old days, back in the Old Testament. We don't need to do that today. Also, we have cheeseburgers, so why would we, So I think there's just a mentality where we're just kind of, maybe we've got the wrong idea about what fasting is all about. So I'm excited to introduce this to us as a church today. Some of you guys have done this before. Many of you maybe have not. You've never even thought of how that could be tied to you as a spiritual discipline. But I want to tell you that the timing of this series is strategic. We've been planning this for close to a year. Because if you didn't know, next month, Awaken celebrates 10 years. Can you believe that? Our 10th birthday. Double digits. We're almost there. Our first decade. And so we just thought, what better way to close out 10 years than a big push toward prayer and fasting and asking God for his provision and guidance and leadership into the next decade, into the next season. And so we're going to be closing out 10 years with a 10-day fast. Some of you may be able to push through a full 10-day fast. And what I mean by a full fast is water only. That's the biblical definition of fasting. Some of you guys may be able to do that. A lot of you may not. That's okay. What we don't want to do is turn fasting into a religious ritual. This is what was happening in Jesus' day. In Isaiah 58, where we're going to read, it's a rebuke to God's people who had taken the religious ritual of fasting and turned it into a show lacking all of the heart. We don't want to do that. What we want to do is carve out some extra time to just spend some time in prayer with God. So some people may be able to press forward with a full fast. Maybe you do 10 days. Maybe you do 1 day. Maybe you do 3 days. And even if you can't medically even do that, everybody can do something. Because if you can't fast from food, I guarantee you can fast from Instagram. Somebody's like, fast from Instagram? What would I do without Facebook? I can't imagine what I would do. You'll be fine. In fact, after a week and a half, you might be better, okay? After a week and a half of not having social media in your life, you could fast from Netflix. You could fast from a lot of different things, okay? Here's the point. The point is not, I'm religious and I've given something up. The point is, I want to spend more time with the Lord. And we just don't have time. So we have to make time. We have to carve something out so that we can spend more time with the Lord. And that's really the point of this. And I'm really excited about what God's going to do in our lives, in our relationships, and in our church as we make more time to spend more time with him. Now, I will tell you an insider tip. If you're planning on doing a full fast, even if you're just doing it for a few days, you're going to want to start now stepping yourself down from caffeine and sugar, okay? Because if you slam a Red Bull the night before, I'm going into this strong, oh no. Call me at 11 when you crash, okay? It's not going to end well. So you need to start stepping yourself down from that. If you're like me, caffeine doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't wake me up. But because I love the taste of coffee so much, I get addicted to caffeine. So when I do an extended fast, I've done a 21-day before. This will be a 10. When I do an extended fast, I have to prepare myself so that I can my body can make it through that. So I just want to start preparing you for that. If that's something that you want to aim for, I would go half calf starting today and start working yourself down so that it's something that you are able to make it through. Now, again, the point is not bragging about how much you're fasting. The point is not turning this into some religious ritual that's just a show on the outside. We're going to talk about all the how next week. Today, we have to start with the why. Because some of you guys are like, okay, cool idea, but not for me. Why would I even I wake up in the morning dreaming about my meals. Like, why would I want to not have a meal? I don't even understand. How would that even help me? I'm going to be hangry all day. I don't know why I would want to do that. Some of you guys are already thinking that. And I get it. This is not because, listen, when we talk about fasting as a spiritual discipline, it's really a lot less about going without something, and it's a lot more about being with God. Okay, I want to clarify that. It's not really so much about the sacrifice that you make. It's about what you put in place of what you've sacrificed. Okay, it's trading. It really is what it is. So like, for instance, if I had a $10 bill, I pulled out a $10 bill and I was like, hey, I want to trade you my $10 bill for your $1 bill. Elizabeth, what would you say? Like, obviously, can we do that now and maybe more later, you know? Why? Well, because the $1 is good, but $10 is better. So we're trading something good, our food, for something better, time with the Lord. Here's another example. If somebody has a new car that they're looking to trade for my 2004 Toyota Highlander with 260,000 miles on it, I'll trade you straight up right now. It's like today. We'll swap keys. You'll go home the owner of a pretty decent SUV. It's been great for our family. Now, my SUV is good, but your new car is better. So it's a trade up, okay? Here's the title of the message today. Write it down. Trade good for best. That's what fasting is all about. Trade good for best. Now, you can pray without fasting, but the point of fasting, when in our context here, is to add in prayer. More time for prayer. Trade good for best. I've already said it. I'll say it again. Fasting is not so much about going without food or without something. It's much more about having more time with God. So it's about trading something good for something better. Saying no to something good. We're not saying food's bad. It's necessary for us. We're saying no to something good so we can say yes to what's best, okay? So I want to take you to 3 passages in Scripture today, Matthew 6, 1 Corinthians 9, and then we're going to land in Isaiah 58 where we're going to close our time together today, and then we're going to come back to Isaiah 58 starting next week as we talk about the how, kind of like practical resources on what does this look like. And if you're thinking that, I don't even know if this is possible, I don't know, like even the caffeine idea. Some of you guys are like freaking out about not drinking a cup of coffee. What would that even look like? Can I just tell you, I'm 48 hours caffeine free. Miracles do happen, all right? Miracles, God is still working in our day, all right? You can do it. And what I want to help you understand today is the why behind this. What's the big deal about it? And why is this so important? So I had you start, we're going to start in Matthew chapter 6. Context, this is part of what's called the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, if you come to Israel with us, we will actually take a seat on the side of the mountain where Jesus would have spoken these words, and we'll read through the Sermon on the Mount. It's unbelievable experience. In Matthew 6, among a whole lot of things, Jesus talks about 3 spiritual disciplines: giving, praying, and fasting. Now, I want you to catch the language here. He does not say if you do these things. He says when you do these things. Watch this. Matthew 6, starting in verse 16. If and when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly, I say to you, they've received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Write this down, number 1. Fasting is not commanded, it is assumed. Here's the interesting thing about fasting in Jesus' day. Fasting then was just a thing that religious people did. And unfortunately, because it was so common, it could often lose the heart and turn into a show. Jesus is kind of rebuking them here in Matthew chapter 6 for letting that happen. And he'll do that again. God will do that again in Isaiah chapter 58. But here Jesus is just teaching them, like, when you do this, here's how to do this. This is just something that they did. Now, Jesus got a question just a few chapters later in Matthew chapter 9. John's disciples approached Jesus, and they said, Jesus, why do we fast, but your disciples don't fast? They don't fast. Why is that? And Jesus said, the day will come when the bridegroom will be removed, then they will fast. He is the bridegroom. Jesus is. He's speaking of himself. Here's what he's saying. The day's going to, while I'm here, there's no need to continue that because people can just come up and talk to me. But the day's going to come, Jesus said, where I will be removed and then fasting will resume. Can I just tell you that fasting is not just an Old Testament thing. Jesus spoke about it and practiced it in his day and said that when he was gone, fasting would resume. Meaning we are living in the day where Jesus said, this will be a thing that my people do. This is not just an Old Testament thing like the sacrificial system. This is something even for us today. But it's, we tend to approach it in different ways. And I think a lot of times it's just so far from our minds. We view it as something that maybe is just old and we don't need for our lives today. Just a few years ago, before I was going to do a long fast that I had never done this before, and so I thought I'm going to get some advice from an older Christian friend of mine. He had been a Christian for 30 or 40 years, and so I realize now the irony of this meeting because I sat down for a meal with him to talk about fasting. So we're sitting across the table, and I didn't tell him that's what I wanted to talk to him about. So we ordered our food, and we're waiting on our food to arrive. And I said, okay, so, hey, here's what I'm going to do. I'm here in the next couple months, I'm gearing up to do a long fast. So talk to me about fasting. What are some things I can learn and be prepared for? And this is his response. Oh, fasting? No, I love food way too much. I don't fast. That's what he said. And I was like, oh, so what's the weather like? Like we just derailed the whole reason that I had sat down for lunch with this guy. And I think that mentality is easy for all of us. I love cheeseburgers. Why would I stop eating them? I could pray and eat a cheeseburger. Why do I have to choose one or the other? In fact, maybe we should pray more because we have a cheeseburger. I don't know. All the vegans in the house would say amen to that. But here's the thing. I think it's very easy for us to lose the value of this spiritual discipline. And I'm just here to tell you that Jesus said the day would come when he was gone that fasting would be taking place. We're living in that day. So I think the question is, do we fast? And if that's not something in our lives, thankfully, we have the opportunity to learn what that looks like and practice it together today. We're trading what's good for what's best. This is a discipline. I want to talk to you for a moment about discipline. Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, or the verses will be on your screen, but it might be good for you to see it yourself. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Paul, context again, he's talking about this. He's using this analogy of the Olympics, racing, and winning a prize. He's talking about spiritual discipline. Watch what he says, 1 Corinthians 9, verse 24. He says, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. Here's what he's saying. There are consequences for an undisciplined spiritual life. Write this down. Number 2, here's a second thought for you. A lack of spiritual discipline means loss of spiritual reward. We can miss out on something when we're not disciplining ourselves spiritually. Now, what's interesting to me on the topic of spiritual discipline is that I meet a lot of people who are very physically disciplined that don't like to discipline themselves spiritually. So I know that it's not because they can't. It's because probably some misaligned priorities. I know people who are up super early, running miles, no matter the weather, CrossFit. They're doing all kinds of things to make sure that they feel good on the outside, But what about the inside, the thing that lasts, right? We go to great lengths, some of us, to take good care of our bodies, to feel good about ourselves. I went with some friends recently to Title Boxing. I don't know if you've ever boxed before. It reminded me of this, where Paul said, I do not box as one beating the air. Paul must have been watching my boxing form, because there I was beating the air. And after like completely wearing me down in this class, the bell rang, and so that was time for a quick water break. So I walked over and I grabbed my water bottle and I sat down. And within like, I swear, 5 seconds of me sitting down, I had this large muscular man yelling at me we don't have time for this, get back to work. And I'm like, did it look like I was sitting? I wasn't sitting. That was him. I was grabbing a water bottle for him. Just, okay. And so I'm like, I go back, and I just thought, like, what's funny is that we pay money for people to beat us up so that we feel good, so that we're progressing, so that we're growing physically. Why wouldn't we do that spiritually? Why would we put so much work into building our body? Hate to break it to you, but you can't take your muscles to heaven. You leave your body in a casket. But what goes with you is your soul. Are you investing in that? Paul says there's some consequences if we're not willing to discipline our bodies. But he also talks about it in a positive way. There's rewards waiting in heaven. You see this? Look at verse 24. He says, run that you may obtain it. Come on, there's a reward. Let's work for it. He says in verse 27, I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. So let me just clarify. When he talks about disqualification, he's not saying lose his salvation. That's not even a biblical concept. You didn't earn it to begin with, so you can't unearn it. Okay, let me just be clear on that. It was never up to you. That was a gift that God gave you, your salvation, because of his son, Jesus Christ. That's it. You can't unearn it. Now, it doesn't give you the license to do whatever you want. If you think that Jesus died so you could live like hell, then you've got the whole thing messed up. You don't even understand it. No, Jesus didn't die to set you free to sin, but to set you free from sin, okay? So I just want to clarify that. But listen, here's what Paul is saying. When he talks about being disqualified, he's not saying he's going to lose his salvation. Remember, the analogy is the Olympic Games, the race. A Greek citizen didn't lose his citizenship because he lost a race. He just was not qualified to receive the award. You see the difference? As a Christian, if you live an undisciplined life, it's not that you get kicked out of heaven. It's that you had an award waiting for you that you've disqualified yourself from. There are additional rewards waiting for us in heaven as we discipline ourselves spiritually, even here on earth. And so I think the big principle for us to understand is that an undisciplined life disqualifies us from the prize and depletes us of power. No wonder so many Christians seem to live such defeated lives. We're doing it to ourselves. We're not disciplining ourselves. Paul says, I'm the boss, not my body. I'm going to do my best to work hard and keep it under control because I don't want to lose the reward that's waiting for me. Don't deplete yourself of power. Don't rob yourself of the prize. Discipline your body physically and your soul spiritually. Okay, so I hope you're seeing this whole thing pieced together. Jesus is saying, he just assumes we're going to do it. Paul talks about physical and spiritual discipline. Now let's flip to the Old Testament, Isaiah 58. This is kind of like the quintessential text about fasting. Q&A about fasting is really what it is, Isaiah 58. The scene, again, context, we've rewound. We are now hundreds of years before Jesus would even be born. The nation of Israel has prophets that God sends out to them. Isaiah, we're hearing from Isaiah. He's a prophet. God speaks to Isaiah. Isaiah speaks to God's people. And Isaiah 58 is this interesting passage where The nation of Israel cries out to God, and they're like, God, we're doing all these fasting things, but it seems like you're not listening. It seems like you're not answering our prayers. And so Isaiah 58 is God's response to their question. Well, you're doing it all the wrong way. You're doing it for a show. God basically tells them in Isaiah 58, I don't need your show. I don't need just all the outward rituals. I'm after your heart. And if you'll allow this to change you, we'll talk about the how next week, but if you'll allow this to change you, then here's why. Here's the promises God gives. Isaiah 58, watch this, verses 8 through 12. 10 promises God gives his people when we fast and we do it with a humble heart. Watch this. Verse 8, Isaiah 58, verse 8. Then shall your light break forth like the dawn. Your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call and the Lord will answer. You shall cry and he will say, here I am. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness, if you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness and your gloom be as the noonday. And the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your desire in scorched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. And your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. Wow. Promises. Check that out. Number 3, would you write this down? Here's a third final thought for you. Spiritual rewards are promised for spiritual discipline. When we discipline ourselves, God promises that there are great rewards awaiting. We just read 10. Let me just kind of highlight these again for you. 10 rewards. Number 1, blessing. Verse 8. He says, then your light shall break forth like the dawn. Light in the Old Testament is often used to describe God's blessing. And can I just remind you that our God is a God who loves to bless his people? Can I just remind you of that? I think oftentimes God gets painted in this very negative way. But Isaiah 30 says that God waits to show mercy to his people. And I think oftentimes we miss out on the display of God's blessing in our lives because we just don't, frankly, make time for him. And we miss out. We rob ourselves when we do that. But that's a promised reward is blessing. Number 2, promised reward is healing. Verse 8, your healing shall spring up speedily. Now, does that mean that if you're sick, then you fast and pray, that that's the formula that makes God heal you? Of course not. God does what he wants to do, and if he doesn't heal you, that doesn't mean he can't. It's because he's chosen not to, because he still has a further purpose that he wants that pain to use in your life. But man, it's great motivation to pray and fast, I would say. And think about this. You may pray that God would take away your cancer or heal that thing in your life. God may not touch you physically, but he'll begin to heal you spiritually, which is our far greater need. Who cares if you're lugging around a hardened heart and you're healed of cancer? Your greater need is to be healed spiritually. Healing is a promised reward. Here's a third promised reward, victory. Verse 8, your righteousness shall go before you. The beautiful truth about a godly life is that we walk confidently, not because of something I've done, not because of who we are, but because of who we belong to, and God's righteousness in us, we walk confidently because of that. We have victory that is promised as we discipline ourselves. There's a fourth promise, protection. Verse 8, the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. If you've read the story in the book of Exodus of Israel exiting Egypt, that happens in chapter 13 of Exodus. Chapter 14, it describes how the pillar of the Lord was a fire by night and cloud by day, leading them in the front. But it says the angel of the Lord was their rear guard, meaning that when they felt surrounded, they had to remind themselves God had them surrounded. And the beautiful thing about prayer and fasting is it surrounds us in God's protection. It's a promise when we discipline ourselves. Promise, reward number 5, answered prayer. Verse 9, then you shall call and the Lord will answer. That's good news. God's listening. When we make time for God, God listens. And by the way, there seems to be additional power for certain things in our lives that is available only through prayer. Case in point, Matthew 17. The disciples bring a demon-possessed man to Jesus. They've been trying to get this demon to come out of the man, and they can't. Jesus says, oh, you have little faith. This type comes out only by prayer and fasting. Telling us, implying that there are certain things that we are in need of in our lives that we will only receive the power for by added time that comes through prayer and fasting. Answered prayer. It's a promise when we're disciplining ourselves. Promise number 6, God's presence, verse 9. You shall cry, and he will say, here I am. Man, I love that one. The more we're in God's presence, the better off we'll be. You believe that? Promise number 7, peace, verse 10. Then shall your light rise in darkness, and your gloom be as the noonday. He promises peace and joy in the darkness. That's what Paul in the New Testament would call peace that surpasses understanding. You don't even know how that's possible. And yet, even in the darkness, your gloom will be as bright as the noonday. God promises peace. Promise number 8, guidance. Verse 11, the Lord will guide you continually. He will continue to guide you. This is a big one I'm praying for as we go into this 10 days of prayer and fasting. Close out 10 years. Launch into the next decade. I'm asking for God's guidance. I'm asking that God would lead me into places that I've never been before. Can I just remind you that everywhere you step, it's new for you, but it's never new for God? There's no new territory for God. God never slowly peers around a corner like, I don't know what's out there. He's already been there. Trust him to guide you. Prayer and fasting invites him into your life to guide you, to lead you into places you've never been. Promise number 9, contentment, verse 11. He'll satisfy your desire in scorched places and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. How amazing that in a context of fasting, he's saying your bones will be strong and you will be thriving. Why? Not because you had a meal, but because you had extra time with the Lord. It's contentment. We're just right where we need to be with the Lord, happy to be with him. 10th reward that's promised is restoration. Verse 12, your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach and the restorer of streets to dwell in. Man, what an incentives package right there, right? Listen, I love that God promises to use us for restoration. If there's any need in our lives, in our relationships, and especially in our culture and world today, is that God would raise some people up to use to bring rebuilding and restoration, to repair. And here's the beautiful thing, that when we discipline ourselves and make more time for God, he promises to use us to bring the repair. He's the one doing it, but he does it through us. How? Not because we do more and try harder, because we just actually do less and pray harder. And as we do that, God does the miraculous in us and through us. So I don't know if you needed an incentives package to fast and pray, but that's a pretty good one. Those 10 things. Like if we listed 10 things we need from the Lord, I imagine that's probably your top 10. Like that pretty much covers it. All of the things that you've been asking for God or felt the need for, this is kind of it. If you're wondering why fast, that's why we fast. Fasting, let me break this down just a little bit further. Fasting is basically, if you think about it, it's a time management principle. When you say yes to something, you are inadvertently saying no to something else. That's just how time works. It's limited. So when you say yes to something, you say no to something else. But when you say no to something, you have time to say yes for something else. God has given us the discipline of fasting as a calendar clearing discipline so that as we say no to some good things, we have time to say yes to the best thing. prayer, talking to the Lord. Again, I'll say it again. It's not so much about what you're doing without. It's much more about what you're doing with your time with God. Adding in that discipline. I'm telling you, it'll change your life. Right here, we just had all of these reminders. We're trading what's good, our food, or social media, or whatever it is. We're trading what's good for what's best. Now, let me just take a moment, because I know that a lot of this is geared toward God's people, Christians. But there are people across the campus today, maybe even joining us online today, that you're not even there yet as far as following Jesus. And so you're like, what's with all these Christians trying to skip meals? Like, I don't know about that. Listen, I can assure you, it's not because we don't love food. We love food, but we love God so much more. The point of fasting is for me to say, I am willing to do whatever it takes to carve out some extra time in my life and spend more time with God. I love what I'm giving up, but I love God so much more, and I'm desperately in need for more time with God. And I'm willing to pay whatever cost possible, whatever cost I need to make sure that my life includes more of God. And if that's some pain, if that's some sacrifice, if that's saying no to some meals or some social media or whatever it might be, if that's pushing myself beyond what I've done before and I get more time with the Lord, then it's worth it. Can I just tell you, if you don't know Jesus, our prayer for you is that you would fall desperately in love with God as well. That you would understand, just as desperate as we are for God, God is desperate. God is desperate for you. If you don't believe that, just look at the cross. God the Father sent Jesus Christ, his only Son, to die in your place so that you don't have to pay the eternal price for your sin. He is desperate for you. He gave up. He sacrificed so that he could have you. Why would we not sacrifice so we could have him? That's fasting. If you don't know Jesus, trust me, he loves you desperately. He's so in love with you. And our prayer is, even over these 10 days, that as we pray for God to intervene in our lives and around our city and in our church, that more and more people would meet Jesus and find him to be all that they need. Desperately in love with the God who gave everything for us. You believe he's worth it? He said you were worth it. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Kevin Miller Podcast. It would mean so much if you would rate this podcast on the platform where you watch or listen. That will help us reach more people with the good news of the gospel. As always, find out more at kevmill.com or follow on Instagram or Facebook.